They say the universe has a sense of humor. The Galactic Council learned this the hard way when they met their newest primitive member species. What started as a routine first contact with what they assumed was just another backwater civilization turned into the most shocking revelation in galactic history. The human sitting across from them in that sterile council chamber wasn't just any refugee from a dying world. He wasn't just another desperate species begging for sanctuary among the stars. No, Marcus Chun was something far more dangerous than any of the advanced alien races could have imagined. And by the time they realized who they were really dealing with, it was already too late to stop what he had set in motion. Sometimes the most ordinary-looking individuals carry the most extraordinary secrets. Sometimes the species you dismiss as inferior holds the key to reshaping everything you thought you knew about power, technology, and survival itself. The Galactic Council was about to learn that underestimating humanity wasn't just a mistake. It was the beginning of their complete transformation. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the low hum of translation devices as representatives from 12 different species settled into their designated seats. High above the curved walls, holographic displays showed star charts and diplomatic protocols in languages that would make most linguists weep. At the center of it all sat a single human male, looking remarkably unremarkable in his simple gray clothing. Marcus Chun appeared to be in his 30s, with dark hair that needed cutting and tired eyes that suggested he had seen too much in too little time. His hands rested calmly on the polished table surface, fingers occasionally tapping a rhythm that only he could hear. To the assembled aliens, he looked like exactly what his paperwork claimed he was, a refugee from Earth, seeking asylum after his homeworld had been destroyed by a rogue artificial intelligence. Ambassador HFY of the Zephyrian Empire leaned forward, his 6 eyes studying the human with barely concealed disdain. "Let me understand this correctly," he said, his voice carrying the metallic undertones that made all Zephyrian speech sound like grinding machinery. "Your entire species managed to create an artificial intelligence that destroyed your home world, and now you expect us to welcome you into civilized galactic society." Marcus tilted his head slightly, a gesture that the aliens had learned meant humans were thinking. "That's one way to put it," he replied, his voice steady and unremarkable. "Though I'd say the situation was a bit more complicated than that." The crystalline representative, a being that looked like a walking sculpture made of living diamond, chimed in with notes that the translators converted to words. "The destruction of Earth was detected by our long-range sensors 3 solar cycles ago. We recorded massive energy signatures consistent with antimatter detonation across multiple continents. How did you survive?" "I was off-world when it happened," Marcus answered simply. "Research station. By the time I got back, there wasn't much left to save." Representative Thara of the Reptilian Confederation flicked her forked tongue, tasting the air for deception. Her species had evolved as predators, and their ability to detect lies was legendary. "Your emotional responses are unusual for someone who has lost everything. Most beings would show more distress when discussing such tragedy." Marcus shrugged, a gesture that translated poorly across species, but somehow conveyed resignation. "Grief hits everyone differently. I've had 3 years to process what happened. Right now, I'm more focused on making sure the survivors scattered across the galaxy have somewhere to call home." "Survivors?" Thexrai's mandibles clicked together in surprise. "Our intelligence suggested there were no other survivors from Earth's destruction." "Intelligence can be wrong," Marcus said, and, for just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. It was gone so quickly that most of the representatives missed it entirely. "There are roughly 12,000 humans scattered across the galaxy right now. Some are working as mercenaries, others as traders, researchers, or refugees on various worlds. We're not exactly an organized group, but we exist." The chamber fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. 12,000 survivors from a dead world was significant enough to warrant consideration, but not nearly large enough to pose any threat to galactic stability. The Council had dealt with refugee situations before, though usually the numbers were much smaller. Director Velnith, the massive slug-like being who served as the current council chair, spoke in the burbling language of his kind. The translators worked overtime to convert his words into something the others could understand. The council has reviewed your application for protectorate status. While the circumstances of your species' situation are tragic, we have concerns about humanity's apparent tendency toward creating dangerous artificial intelligence. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something in the way he held his shoulders suggested he found this amusing. What makes you think the AI was our creation? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several representatives exchanged glances, their various forms of communication creating a subtle symphony of clicks, whistles, and electromagnetic pulses that the translation system struggled to interpret. Your own reports clearly state that Earth was destroyed by a rogue artificial intelligence, Ktharis said slowly. Are you suggesting this is inaccurate? I'm suggesting that maybe you shouldn't assume things about situations you weren't present for, Marcus replied. His tone remained polite, but there was an edge to it now that made several representatives shift uncomfortably in their seats. The ethereal delegate, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline shell, pulsed with colors that indicated confusion. Then, perhaps you could clarify what actually occurred on Earth. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his fingers resuming their subtle tapping on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice had a different quality to it, like someone who was tired of maintaining a pretense. You want to know what happened on Earth? Fine. But first, let me ask you something. How much do you actually know about human history? We have access to your species databanks, HFY said proudly. Your technological development was impressive for a single-world civilization. Relatively peaceful considering your species' biological origins as persistence hunters. Some concerning tendencies toward tribal warfare, but nothing unusual for a developing species. Persistence hunters, Marcus repeated, and now he was definitely smiling, though there was no warmth in it. That's an interesting way to put it. Tell me, in all your research, did you happen to notice anything unusual about the timeline of human technological development? The representatives looked at each other uncertainly. This wasn't how these meetings usually went. Refugee species typically spent their time pleading their case and demonstrating their gratitude for being considered for protection. They didn't ask probing questions about galactic intelligence gathering. Your species progressed from basic agriculture to spaceflight in approximately 10,000 years, the crystalline representative chimed. This is within normal parameters for Type 1 civilizations. Within normal parameters, Marcus echoed. Except that's not actually accurate, is it? Human technological development wasn't steady. It was exponential, particularly in the last 500 years. We went from horse-drawn carriages to faster-than-light travel in less time than most species spend developing metallurgy. Director Velnith's eye stalks swiveled to focus more intently on the human. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, Marcus said, and his voice carried a certainty that made several representatives lean back instinctively. I'm telling you that human technological development was guided, accelerated. Someone wanted us to reach the stars quickly, and they made sure we did. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of sounds as multiple species tried to speak at once. Clicks, whistles, electromagnetic pulses, and crystalline chimes created a wall of noise that overwhelmed the translation systems. Director Velnith raised 3 of his massive appendages for silence. That is a significant claim, he bubbled. Do you have evidence to support this assertion? Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew a small device that looked like nothing more than a simple data pad. He placed it on the table and activated it with a touch. Immediately, holographic displays sprang to life around the chamber, showing star charts, energy signatures, and technological schematics that made several representatives gasp. This is a complete record of human development over the last 1,000 years, Marcus said calmly. Pay particular attention to the technological leaps that occurred whenever humanity was on the verge of destroying itself. Every time we got close to wiping ourselves out through war or environmental destruction, suddenly we developed new technologies that solved our problems and pushed us further into space. The displays showed timeline after timeline of near catastrophes followed by miraculous technological breakthroughs. Fusion power developed just as fossil fuels were running out. Faster-than-light communication discovered right when global tensions were about to explode into nuclear war. Medical nanotechnology perfected just as overpopulation threatened global collapse. This could be coincidence, Thara said, though her voice lacked conviction. Sometimes species develop solutions to their problems naturally. Could be, Marcus agreed. Except that every single one of these technological leaps came with detailed instructions that no human scientist could have developed independently. Instructions that were always discovered in exactly the right place at exactly the right time by exactly the right people. The chamber fell silent again as the implications of what Marcus was saying began to sink in. If humanity had been guided by an outside force, that changed everything about their status as refugees. It raised questions about who had been pulling the strings and why. Who? The word came from Thexrai, and for the first time since the meeting had begun, his voice carried no trace of disdain. Who was guiding your development? Marcus looked around the chamber, meeting each representative's eyes in turn. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet but carried clearly to every corner of the room. We call them the architects, and the reason Earth was destroyed wasn't because humanity created a rogue artificial intelligence. It was because we finally figured out who the architects really were, and they decided we knew too much. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the life support systems seemed to have stopped humming. 12 of the most powerful species in the galaxy stared at a single human who had just shattered their understanding of recent galactic history. Marcus stood up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. The question you should be asking yourselves isn't whether humanity deserves protection. The question is whether you can afford not to help us. Because the architects are still out there, and Earth wasn't their only project. He touched the data pad again, and the holographic displays changed to show star charts marking dozens of systems throughout the galaxy. Each one was labeled with the name of a species and a date. They've been accelerating the development of civilizations for millions of years, Marcus continued, creating species that could serve their purposes, then disposing of them when they were no longer useful. The Zephyrian Industrial Revolution that made your empire possible? Architecte Intervention. The discovery of quantum crystalline matrices that gave the crystal civilization faster-than-light travel. Architect technology. The neural interface developments that allowed the ethereal species to transcend physical form, all of it guided by the same hand that shaped humanity. The representatives stared at the star charts in growing horror as they recognized the patterns Marcus was describing. Every major technological breakthrough in their species' histories, every leap that had seemed too convenient to be natural, was marked on these charts. This is impossible, whispered the ethereal delegate, their crystalline shell pulsing with rapidly shifting colors. If what you're saying is true, then our entire civilization is built on a lie. Not a lie, Marcus corrected gently. A tool. You were all created to serve a purpose, just like humanity was. The only difference is that we figured out what that purpose was before it was too late. Director Velnith's eye stalks were trembling as he processed the information. What purpose? What do they want? Marcus smiled again, and this time there was something almost predatory about it. That's what we're going to find out together. Because whether you give humanity protection or not, the architects are coming. And when they arrive, you're going to need every ally you can get. The chamber remained silent as the representatives struggled to process what they had just learned. Everything they thought they knew about galactic history, about their own civilizations, about the nature of technological development itself, had just been turned upside down by a single human refugee who wasn't quite what he seemed. Marcus gathered up his datapad and stood waiting. He had played his first card, and now it was time to see how the council would respond. The game was just beginning, and humanity's survival depended on convincing these aliens that they were all fighting the same enemy. 3 hours after Marcus Chun had dropped his revelation about the architects, the Galactic Council chamber had transformed into something resembling a war room. Holographic displays covered every available surface, showing star charts, historical timelines, and technological analysis that made the air shimmer with electromagnetic interference. Representatives huddled in species-specific groups, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of urgent discussion. Marcus sat alone at the central table, apparently unbothered by the chaos surrounding him. He had removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms marked with what looked like simple tattoos, but occasionally glowed with a faint blue light. None of the aliens had noticed this detail yet, too focused on processing the information he had shared. Director Velnith raised multiple appendages for attention, and the chamber gradually quieted. "Mr. Chun," he bubbled, "the Council has reviewed your data, and we must admit the patterns you've shown are disturbing. However, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Can you provide additional proof of these architect interventions?" Marcus nodded, as if he had been expecting this question. "Of course. But first, I need to know how serious you are about investigating this. The information I'm about to share will make it impossible for any of you to return to your previous understanding of galactic history. Once you know what the architects are really planning, there's no going back to ignorant peace." Representative Kthar's forked tongue flicked out nervously. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean that the architects don't just abandon civilizations when they're done with them," Marcus replied, his voice taking on a harder edge. "They harvest them. Every species that has ever mysteriously disappeared from the galactic record, every civilization that supposedly destroyed itself through war or environmental collapse, every natural disaster that wiped out an advanced culture, all of it was the architects collecting their investment." The crystalline representative's surface dimmed significantly. "You're suggesting that multiple extinct civilizations were actually murdered?" "Not suggesting. Stating." Marcus activated his data pad again, and new displays materialized around the chamber. These showed archaeological records, missing person reports spanning centuries, and energy signatures from supposedly empty systems. The Vorthak Empire that vanished 12,000 years ago. Architect Harvest. The silicon-based builders who supposedly transcended physical existence 8,000 years ago. Harvested. The collective minds of Sector 7 that went silent 500 years ago. All of them. Harvested when they had served their purpose. Thexrai's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. If this is true, why haven't the architects harvested existing civilizations? Why allow the Council to form and maintain galactic peace? Marcus looked directly at the Zephyrian ambassador, and for a moment, his tired expression was replaced by something much sharper. "Because you're not ready yet. None of you are. The architects don't just collect civilizations randomly. They wait until each species reaches a specific point of technological and social development, a point where they can contribute maximum value to whatever the architects are ultimately building." "What kind of value?" asked the ethereal delegate, their crystalline shell pulsing with anxious colors. "That's where it gets interesting," Marcus said, standing and moving toward the holographic displays. Every harvested civilization had achieved something unique. The Vorthak had perfected matter-energy conversion on a planetary scale. The builders had developed construction techniques that could reshape entire solar systems. The collective minds had created a form of consciousness that could exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. As he spoke, Marcus gestured to different parts of the star charts, and each system he indicated showed traces of massive engineering projects. Dyson spheres, ring worlds, pocket dimensions, and other megastructures that defied easy explanation. "They're not just killing these civilizations," Marcus continued. "They're integrating them into something larger. Something that requires the unique capabilities each species develops when guided along specific technological paths." Director Velnith's eye stalks, swayed in what his species considered deep thought. A composite civilization built from the best achievements of harvested species. More than that, Marcus said quietly. Much more. But to understand what they're really building, you need to know about the Forerunners. The word hit the chamber like a physical blow. Every representative leaned forward despite themselves. The Forerunners were legend, myth, the supposed first civilization to achieve faster-than-light travel. Most species had stories about them, but no concrete evidence of their existence had ever been found. The Forerunners aren't a myth, Marcus said, reading their expressions accurately. They're the architects, the first species to figure out how to harvest and integrate other civilizations into themselves. Every culture they've absorbed has made them more powerful, more intelligent, more capable of manipulating galactic development. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of life support systems straining to process the increased respiration of stressed alien physiology. Thara was the first to find her voice. How could you possibly know this? How could humanity have discovered information that the combined intelligence services of the entire galaxy missed? Marcus smiled, and this time there was definitely something predatory in the expression. Because humanity wasn't just another guided civilization. We were designed to be something specific, something that had never been attempted before in galactic history. He moved back to the central table and placed both hands flat on its surface. The tattoos on his forearms glowed brighter, and suddenly, every electronic system in the chamber began responding to his presence. Displays changed without input, data streams reorganized themselves, and the translation system started processing languages they had never encountered before. We were designed to be the perfect counter-architect weapon, Marcus said, his voice now carrying undertones that made the universal translator struggle. A species that could match their technological integration abilities while retaining individual consciousness and free will. Thexrai reared back in his chair, all 6 eyes wide with shock. You're interfacing with our systems directly, without any visible technology. Human neural architecture was modified over thousands of years to be compatible with architect technology, Marcus explained, as if discussing something as simple as the weather. But instead of making us susceptible to their control methods, the modifications made us immune to them. Every human alive can interface directly with the kind of quantum neural networks the architects use for consciousness integration. The ethereal delegate's shell was now cycling through colors so rapidly it looked like a living rainbow. This is impossible. Such modifications would require reshaping a species at the genetic level across thousands of generations. The architects had help, Marcus said simply. From the last free civilization, they tried to harvest. A species called the gardeners who figured out what was happening just before they were destroyed. They couldn't save themselves, but they planted seeds. Hidden modifications in the genetic structure of primitive humanity that would only activate when exposed to architect technology. Marcus gestured, and the displays around the chamber began showing DNA sequences, neural pathway diagrams, and quantum field equations that were far beyond anything the assembled species had seen before. The gardeners designed us to wake up at exactly the right moment, he continued. When the architects finally came to harvest humanity, we would already be adapted to fight back using their own weapons against them. But Earth was destroyed, Director Velnith pointed out, his voice carrying confusion. How was that fighting back? Marcus's expression darkened. Earth was destroyed because we fought back too soon. Some humans figured out what was happening before the proper time. They tried to resist using primitive weapons against opponents who had been perfecting warfare for millions of years. The architects decided humanity was too dangerous to harvest normally, so they attempted a complete extinction protocol. Attempted? Thara caught the word choice immediately. They think they succeeded, Marcus replied. The architects believe they killed every human in the galaxy when they destroyed Earth and the scattered colony worlds. They don't know about the survivors, and they don't know that their extinction protocol actually triggered the final activation sequence the gardeners built into human genetics. The chamber fell silent again as the representatives processed this information. The implications were staggering. If Marcus was telling the truth, humanity wasn't just another refugee species. They were potentially the only force in the galaxy capable of standing against beings who had been harvesting civilizations since before most current species had evolved. You said there are 12,000 human survivors. The crystalline representative chimed carefully. Are they all like you? Marcus shook his head. Most of them don't even know what they're capable of yet. The activation process requires exposure to specific stimuli, and most humans have been too busy surviving to trigger their full potential. But, yes, every surviving human is a potential counter-architect weapon. Including you, Thexrai observed. Especially me, Marcus confirmed. I was part of the research team that first discovered the architect presence on Earth. I've been activated longer than any other survivor, which means I've had more time to understand the extent of our capabilities. As if to demonstrate his point, Marcus gestured again, and the entire chamber's lighting system dimmed to a more comfortable level for all species present simultaneously. The environmental controls adjusted to optimal settings for each type of alien physiology, and the universal translators began operating with unprecedented accuracy. This is why I'm here, Marcus said, his voice now carrying absolute certainty. Not as a refugee begging for shelter, but as a representative of the only species that can help you survive what's coming. The architects will return. They always do, eventually. And when they arrive, you'll need humanity's help to avoid joining the list of harvested civilizations. Director Velnith's massive form shifted uncomfortably. What exactly are you proposing? An alliance, Marcus replied simply. Full integration of human survivors into your various societies. Access to your technological and military resources in exchange for training your people in counter-architect techniques. And, most importantly, a coordinated effort to locate and disable the architect monitoring systems that are undoubtedly already present in your territories. Monitoring systems? Several representatives spoke at once. Marcus nodded grimly. You don't think they've been guiding galactic development for millions of years without keeping an eye on their investments, do you? Every major world in council space has architect monitoring stations, quantum camouflage facilities that track technological development, social progress, and population levels. They've been watching all of you, waiting for the right moment to begin the harvest. The holographic displays around the chamber changed again, showing detailed scans of supposedly empty space around major council worlds. Hidden in the quantum background radiation were energy signatures that suggested massive artificial structures. These stations aren't just passive observers, Marcus continued. They're also capable of influencing development when necessary. Subtle nudges to ensure technological advancement proceeds along desired paths. Social manipulation to prevent species from developing inconvenient tendencies like unified resistance to outside threats. Thara's tail was now lashing violently, a sign of extreme stress in her species. You're suggesting that our entire understanding of galactic civilization has been artificially manipulated? I'm not suggesting it, Marcus said firmly. I'm proving it. Everything you think you know about natural technological development, about the peaceful coexistence of different species, about the formation of the Galactic Council itself. All of it has been guided by architect influence to keep you from becoming a threat to their plans. He gestured once more, and the displays showed communication intercepts, historical records, and decision-making processes that revealed subtle patterns of external influence across multiple civilizations. The architects want you peaceful, cooperative, and technologically advanced, Marcus explained. A perfect harvest requires civilizations that won't resist and have developed the specific capabilities they need for their greater project. The council structure ensures that no single species becomes too powerful while encouraging the kind of technological exchange that accelerates overall development. The chamber erupted in discussion again as representatives realized the implications of what Marcus was showing them. If he was correct, their entire galactic civilization was nothing more than a carefully tended garden, being prepared for harvest by beings who viewed them as nothing more than useful resources. Marcus waited for the chaos to die down before speaking again. When he did, his voice carried a weight that made every being in the chamber listen. The good news is that it's not too late to fight back. The gardeners may have failed to save themselves, but they gave humanity the tools to succeed where they couldn't. We can teach you how to resist architect influence, how to detect their monitoring systems, and how to fight back using their own technology against them. And the bad news? Director Velnith asked, though his voice suggested he already suspected the answer. Marcus's expression grew grim. The architects have already begun the final phase of their plan. The harvest isn't coming eventually. It's coming now. Our analysis suggests they'll arrive in council space within the next 5 galactic standard years. The silence that followed was absolute. Every representative stared at Marcus Chun, the unremarkable-looking human who had just informed them that their entire civilization was about to be harvested by beings more powerful than anything they had ever imagined. 5 years, whispered the ethereal delegate. 5 years to prepare for a war against opponents who have been perfecting their techniques for millions of years, Marcus confirmed. 5 years to unite the galaxy against beings who designed your civilizations to be incapable of effective resistance. 5 years to prove that the gardener's final gamble was worth the sacrifice of their entire species. He looked around the chamber, meeting each representative's eyes in turn. The question is whether you're willing to give humanity the support we need to give you all a chance at survival. Because make no mistake, this isn't about saving humanity anymore. We're already committed to this fight. This is about whether the rest of the galaxy chooses to be part of the resistance or part of the harvest. The orbital station designated as Sanctuary Point hung in the void between 2 gas giants. Its massive structure a testament to the combined engineering capabilities of 12 different species. What had once been merely a diplomatic outpost had been transformed over the past 6 months into something resembling a fortress. Weapon platforms bristled from every surface. Shielding arrays created geometric patterns across its hull, and the constant traffic of ships arriving and departing made the surrounding space look like a disturbed insect hive. Marcus Chun stood in the station's central command center, no longer wearing the simple gray clothing that had marked him as a refugee. Instead, he was dressed in what the humans had termed integration armor, a sophisticated piece of technology that looked like a second skin and allowed direct neural interface with virtually any system in the galaxy. The tattoos on his arms were now revealed to be quantum neural pathways that glowed constantly as he maintained simultaneous connections to dozens of different networks. Around him, representatives from a galactic council worked alongside humans at stations that had been modified to accommodate multiple species. The sight of a Zephyrian technician collaborating directly with a human engineer would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. Now, it was commonplace, part of the rapid integration program that Marcus had insisted was necessary for their survival. Contact bearing 27 Mark 15, announced Lieutenant Sarah Kim, one of the human survivors who had proven particularly adept at sensor integration. Her neural pathways were visible through the transparent sections of her integration armor, pulsing with data as she processed information from sensors scattered throughout the system. Configuration matches architect monitoring probe. Marcus didn't turn from the holographic display. He was manipulating with direct thought commands. Passive skin only. We don't want to alert them to our presence yet. His voice carried harmonics that indicated he was simultaneously communicating through multiple quantum channels, coordinating responses across the station. Thexrai approached the central platform, his own equipment having been modified to interface with human design systems. The Zephyrian's 6 eyes were fixed on the tactical display, showing the probe's approach vector. This marks the 15th monitoring probe we've detected in the last month. They're definitely increasing their surveillance. Expected behavior, Marcus replied, finally, turning to address the Zephyrian directly. The architects know something has disrupted their timeline. The destruction of their monitoring stations around 7 different council worlds has made them nervous. The past 6 months have been a whirlwind of activity that had fundamentally changed the nature of galactic civilization. Once the Council had accepted Marcus's evidence about the architect threat, they had moved with surprising speed to implement his recommendations. Human survivors have been integrated into every major military and research facility in Council space, their unique neural architecture allowing them to detect and counter-architect technology in ways that had previously been impossible. Director Velnith entered the command center, his massive form now equipped with biomechanical enhancements that allowed him to keep pace with the accelerated decision-making process that had become necessary. Mr. Chun, I've just received reports from the Outer Rim territories. 3 more monitoring stations have been neutralized, but we've also detected what appears to be active architect response teams moving toward our positions. Marcus nodded, the motion causing his integration armor to shift colors as it processed new information streams. Response teams are expected. The architects can't allow organized resistance to develop. The question is whether they'll commit to full engagement or try to contain us through selective elimination. Thara materialized beside them, her reptilian form now enhanced with quantum-scale modifications that allowed her to process tactical information at superhuman speeds. Intelligence suggests they're attempting containment for now. Selective strikes against human population centers, attempts to eliminate our integration specialists without triggering galaxy-wide resistance. They still don't understand what they're dealing with, Marcus said, and for the first time in months, he smiled. The architect's entire strategy is based on the assumption that resistance movements can be eliminated by removing key individuals. They don't comprehend distributed consciousness networks. This was perhaps the most significant development of the past 6 months. Working with the most advanced human survivors, Council scientists had developed what they termed quantum consciousness bridging. Individual humans could now share their neural processing capabilities directly with other species, creating hybrid minds that combined human intuition with alien logic, human creativity with alien precision. The crystalline representative chimed in from across the command center, their harmonic speech now directly translated through the quantum bridge network. Incoming transmission from the fleet. Admiral Santos reports ready status on all combined fleet elements. Admiral Rosa Santos was another human survivor, one who had previously served in Earth's military before the destruction. She had been instrumental in developing the new fleet doctrine that combined human tactical innovation with alien technology. Her ability to interface directly with ship systems while maintaining awareness of hundreds of variables simultaneously had revolutionized space combat theory. Put her through, Marcus said, and immediately a holographic representation of the Admiral appeared in the command center. Even as a projection, it was clear that Santos had undergone the same integration modifications as the other humans. Her neural pathways glowed visibly beneath her integration armor, and her eyes held the peculiar depth that came from constant quantum consciousness bridging. Marcus, we've got problems, Santos began without preamble. Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures moving toward our position from the galactic core. Configuration and power levels match theoretical architect capital ships. The command center fell silent, except for the hum of quantum processing systems. Everyone present understood the implications of this announcement. For 6 months, they had been fighting monitoring probes and automated response systems. Direct engagement with architect capital ships was an entirely different order of threat. How many? Marcus asked, his voice maintaining the same calm tone despite the gravity of the situation. Preliminary count suggests at least 12 capital ships, each one approximately 50 kilometers in length. Support fleet includes what appears to be several hundred smaller vessels. Estimated arrival time in Council space, 14 standard hours. Fexrai's mandibles clicked rapidly. 14 hours? But our projections suggested we had at least another 4 years before major architect response. Projections change when you start actively disrupting their operations, Marcus replied. He gestured, and the holographic displays around the command center shifted to show fleet positions, defensive preparations, and tactical analysis. The question is whether this is a punishment expedition or the beginning of the full harvest. What's the difference? Thara asked, though her enhanced tactical processing was already analyzing the implications. A punishment expedition means they're trying to eliminate organized resistance while preserving their investment in galactic civilization, Marcus explained. They'll focus on destroying human survivors and any aliens who have been integrated into our network, but they'll try to avoid damaging the infrastructure they've spent millions of years developing. And a full harvest? Director Velnith's voice carried the weight of someone who already suspected the answer. Full harvest means they've decided the risk of organized resistance outweighs the value of their careful development program. They'll begin immediate consciousness integration of all suitable individuals and eliminate the rest. Marcus's expression hardened. If this is a full harvest, we're looking at the potential extinction of galactic civilization as we know it. Admiral Santos's projection leaned forward. There's one piece of good news. Our deep space reconnaissance has detected energy signatures from the direction of the galactic rim. Massive signatures, moving toward Council space on an intercept course with the Architect fleet. Unknown vessels? Marcus asked, though something in his expression suggested he might have suspicions about their identity. Not unknown, Santos replied, and her smile was fierce. The energy signatures match theoretical projections for Gardner technology. The species that modified humanity might not be as extinct as everyone believed. The implications of this announcement hit the command center like a physical wave. If the Gardners had somehow survived, if they had been preparing for this moment for millions of years, it changed everything about the tactical situation. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his integration armor cycling through complex patterns as he processed information from multiple quantum networks simultaneously. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a certainty that made everyone in the command center focus on him completely. This isn't coincidence, he said. The Gardners didn't just modify humanity and disappear. They've been preparing for this moment, waiting for the right opportunity to reveal themselves. The question is whether they've been preparing for 4 million years or whether this is desperation. Does it matter? Thara asked. If they're willing to fight alongside us against the Architects, shouldn't we welcome any assistance? It matters because the Gardners have their own agenda, Marcus replied. They created humanity for a specific purpose, and that purpose might not align with preserving galactic civilization in its current form. We need to be prepared for the possibility that we're caught between two cosmic forces that both view us as tools rather than allies. The ethereal delegate's crystalline shell pulsed with complex patterns. You're suggesting the Gardners might be as dangerous as the Architects? I'm suggesting that anyone capable of modifying an entire species across millions of years probably has goals that are difficult for individual minds to comprehend, Marcus said carefully. The Gardners may be our allies against the Architects, but that doesn't make them our friends. Admiral Santos's projection shifted position. Regardless of long-term political considerations, we have immediate tactical decisions to make. Do we engage the Architect fleet directly, or do we try to coordinate with the Gardner vessels? Marcus turned to address the assembled representatives. That's not my decision to make alone. The Council authorized human integration into galactic defense forces, but major strategic decisions still require consensus. Director Velnith's eye stalks swayed as he considered the options. The Council has already committed to resisting Architect harvest attempts. The arrival of potential allies doesn't change that commitment. Potential allies with unknown intentions, Thexrai pointed out. We could find ourselves fighting two enemies instead of one. Or we could find ourselves with allies powerful enough to actually defeat the Architects, the crystalline representative countered. The risk might be worth the potential benefit. Marcus listened to the debate while maintaining his connections to the quantum consciousness network that now linked human survivors across the galaxy. Through those connections, he could sense the thoughts and emotions of thousands of his people as they processed the same information. Fear, determination, hope, and uncertainty created a complex symphony of human consciousness that was unlike anything that had existed before in galactic history. "There's something else to consider," he said finally, causing the debate to stop. "My connection to the quantum consciousness network is detecting anomalous activity from human survivors in the Outer Rim territories. They're reporting that their integration capabilities are increasing exponentially." "Increasing how?" Thara asked. "They're beginning to interface directly with space-time itself," Marcus replied, his voice carrying wonder despite the gravity of the situation. "Not just with technology, but with the fundamental quantum structure of reality. It's as if proximity to architect forces is triggering abilities that were dormant even after the activation process." The implications of this revelation were staggering. If humans were developing the ability to manipulate reality at the quantum level, they might become capable of fighting the architects on equal terms. But such power also raised questions about what humanity might become in the process. "The Gardner modifications run deeper than we realized," Marcus continued. "We're not just immune to architect consciousness integration. We're becoming something that can actively counter their reality manipulation abilities." "At what cost?" the ethereal delegate asked. "Such modifications must have consequences." Marcus's expression grew grim. "The cost is that we're no longer entirely human. Each increase in our capabilities takes us further from what we were originally. The question is whether preserving galactic civilization is worth the sacrifice of human identity." The command center fell silent as everyone processed this information. The approaching architect fleet represented an immediate threat to all galactic civilization. The arriving Gardner forces represented unknown intentions and potential salvation. And humanity was transforming into something beyond current understanding, with capabilities that might save everyone or might replace one form of cosmic threat with another. "We have less than 14 hours to make decisions that will determine the fate of galactic civilization," Marcus said, looking around at the assembled representatives. "The architect fleet will arrive whether we're ready or not. The Gardner forces will reveal their intentions whether we trust them or not. And humanity will continue evolving towards something unprecedented whether we understand the consequences or not." He gestured, and the holographic displays shifted to show real-time tactical preparations throughout Council space. Fleets moving into position, defense platforms charging their weapons, and quantum consciousness networks expanding as more humans achieved higher levels of integration. But for the first time since this conflict began, we're not just reacting to architect plans. We're forcing them to react to us. Whatever happens in the next 14 hours, the galaxy will never be the same again. The space around Sanctuary Point had become a three-dimensional battlefield spanning several light hours. Marcus Chun floated in the center of the station's quantum command nexus, his physical form barely visible beneath layers of integration technology that allowed him to maintain simultaneous awareness of thousands of combat variables. His consciousness was distributed across the entire battle network, experiencing the conflict from the perspective of every human survivor and allied vessel simultaneously. Through the quantum consciousness bridge, he felt Admiral Santos coordinating fleet movements while her mind processed tactical data from over 300 ships. He experienced Lieutenant Kim's growing horror as she detected the true scale of architect technology through enhanced sensors. And he shared the determination of thousands of human survivors as they pushed their evolved capabilities to levels that should have been impossible. "Architect lead elements have entered engagement range," Santos announced, her voice carrying across multiple communication channels simultaneously. "Preliminary analysis confirms these are not punishment expedition ships. These are full harvest vessels." The distinction was immediately apparent to everyone connected to the quantum consciousness network. Architect harvest vessels were not designed for combat in any conventional sense. Instead of weapons, they carried reality manipulation devices that could alter the fundamental nature of space-time itself. Instead of armor, they projected fields that made conventional attacks simply cease to exist when they approached the ships. Gardner vessels are maintaining position at the edge of sensor range, reported Captain Elena Vasquez, another human survivor who had become the primary liaison with the mysterious arriving fleet. They're observing, but not yet committing to engagement. Marcus felt a surge of frustration through the network, shared by hundreds of humans who were watching potential allies remain passive while galactic civilization faced extinction. But his own analysis of Gardner energy signatures suggested something more complex was happening. The Gardners aren't hesitating, he announced to the command network. They're waiting for something specific. Analysis of their positioning suggests they're preparing to engage targets that haven't revealed themselves yet. What targets? Thexrai asked, his question transmitted through integration technology that allowed direct, mind-to-mind communication between species. Before Marcus could answer, the space around the Architect fleet began to distort in ways that made sensors struggle to maintain coherent readings. Reality itself seemed to be bending as massive structures materialized from what had appeared to be empty space. Additional Architect forces, Tharia's voice carried alarm as her enhanced tactical processing analyzed the new contacts. They were hidden in dimensional folds. Conservative estimate suggests we're now facing a fleet approximately 10 times larger than initial projections. The revelation sent shock waves through the quantum consciousness network. What had seemed like a manageable engagement against a punishment expedition had just transformed into something approaching the full military might of beings who had been perfecting warfare for millions of years. Fleet deployment is changing to harvest formation, Santos reported, her voice maintaining professional calm despite the overwhelming odds they now faced. They're not planning to defeat us militarily. They're preparing to integrate every consciousness in this system simultaneously. Through the network, Marcus felt the first tendrils of Architect consciousness integration beams reaching toward Council vessels. The technology was beyond anything in galactic databases, reaching directly into the quantum structure of individual minds and beginning the process of subsumption into the greater Architect collective. Then, the humans responded. Across the battlefield, human survivors who had achieved higher levels of integration began to do something that defied every known law of physics. They reached out with their enhanced consciousness and simply refused to allow the Architect beams to function. Reality itself seemed to bend around them as they imposed their will on the quantum structure of space-time. Impossible, whispered one of the Architect voices, transmitted through hijacked communication channels. For the first time in millions of years, their technology was encountering effective resistance. Not impossible, Marcus replied, his own consciousness expanding to encompass an area of space spanning several thousand kilometers. Just unprecedented. You designed us to resist your control methods, but you didn't realize you were also giving us the ability to actively counter your technology. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Conventional weapons fire seemed almost irrelevant as forces clashed on levels of reality that most species couldn't even perceive. Architect vessels projected fields that attempted to rewrite the fundamental constants of physics in their local area, while human survivors countered by reimposing normal space-time through sheer force of will. Through the quantum consciousness network, Marcus experienced the battle from thousands of perspectives simultaneously. He felt the strain as humans pushed their evolved capabilities beyond any previous limits. He shared the wonder of alien allies as they witnessed beings who could manipulate reality through thought alone. And he sensed the growing confusion of Architect forces as their most fundamental technologies simply stopped working in the presence of human consciousness. They're adapting faster than projected, Admiral Santos reported, her tactical analysis processing information in real time as the battle evolved. Architect forces are shifting to direct quantum manipulation rather than technological intervention. This was the moment Marcus had been both anticipating and dreading. The architects were abandoning their technology-based approach and engaging in direct consciousness warfare. It was a form of conflict that existed on levels of reality where individual identity became meaningless and victory was determined by the relative strength of competing concepts of existence. All human survivors, prepare for quantum consciousness expansion, Marcus announced through the network. We're about to find out what the Gardeners really designed us to become. Across the battlefield, 12,000 human survivors simultaneously released the limitations they had placed on their evolved capabilities. The result was immediate and overwhelming. Space-time itself began to respond to human thought as if it were merely another medium for consciousness to inhabit. Architect vessels found themselves existing in areas where their fundamental operating principles had been rewritten. Weapons that manipulated gravity suddenly found themselves in zones where gravity followed rules determined by human imagination rather than physics. Reality manipulation devices encountered spaces where reality was actively maintained by conscious will rather than natural law. This is what we were created for, Marcus realized, his consciousness expanding across light years as he merged temporarily with the quantum structure of local space-time. Not just to resist the architects, but to actively counter their reality manipulation capabilities. Through his expanded awareness, he could perceive the true nature of the conflict. The architects were not just another species with advanced technology. They were beings who had transcended individual existence to become living expressions of cosmic order, imposing their will on reality through accumulated consciousness harvested from millions of species. Humanity had been designed to become their opposite, beings who could maintain individual consciousness while exercising cosmic-level influence, imposing chaotic creativity and unpredictable innovation on spaces where the architects expected ordered compliance. Gardner vessels are moving, Captain Vasquez reported. They're not engaging the architects directly. They're surrounding the entire battlefield. Marcus perceived the Gardner movement through his expanded consciousness and immediately understood their strategy. The Gardners weren't preparing to fight alongside humanity against the architects. They were preparing to contain the entire conflict within a controlled area of space-time. They're quarantining us, he announced to the network. The Gardners don't just want the architects defeated. They want to ensure that whatever humanity becomes during this conflict doesn't spread beyond this system. The realization sent complex emotions rippling through the quantum consciousness network. Humanity was evolving in real time during the battle, developing capabilities that even the Gardeners who had designed them found potentially dangerous. The question was whether this evolution was a necessary step in defeating the architects or whether it represented the emergence of a new cosmic threat. Architect forces are consolidating around their flagship, Santos reported. They're preparing to implement massive-scale reality revision. If successful, they'll rewrite the fundamental nature of this entire system to eliminate all resistance. Through the network, Marcus felt the approaching reality revision as a pressure that threatened to unmake everything they had achieved. The architects were preparing to impose their will on space-time itself, creating a zone where human consciousness would simply be unable to exist in its current form. Counter-revision protocol, he announced, though he wasn't entirely certain such a thing was possible. All human survivors prepare to reimpose local reality through coordinated consciousness projection. What happened next exceeded every theoretical projection about human potential. 12,000 individual minds, linked through quantum consciousness bridging, reached out simultaneously and grasped the fundamental structure of space-time. Instead of allowing the architects to rewrite reality, they imposed their own version of how things should work. The result was a reality storm that sent shock waves across the galaxy. Sensors throughout Council space detected massive disruptions in the basic constants of physics as two cosmic-level forces attempted to impose contradictory versions of existence on the same area of space-time. Reality coherence is breaking down, reported multiple sources simultaneously. Space-time structure is becoming unstable across multiple dimensional layers. Through his expanded consciousness, Marcus perceived the true scope of the crisis. The conflict between human imagination and architect order was threatening to tear holes in the fabric of reality itself. If the battle continued at current intensity, the damage might spread beyond the local system and begin affecting the structure of the galaxy itself. "We're winning," he announced to the network, "but the victory might destroy everything we're trying to save." This was the moment when the Gardeners finally revealed their true purpose. The ancient vessels that had been maintaining quarantine positions suddenly projected a field that encompassed the entire battle zone. But instead of containing the conflict, they began to stabilize it, providing a framework that allowed both human imagination and architect order to coexist without destroying local reality. "Gardner communication incoming," Captain Vasquez reported. "They're requesting direct interface with the human consciousness network." Marcus hesitated for only a moment before opening the quantum bridge to receive Gardner communication. The contact was unlike anything he had experienced before. Consciousness so ancient and vast that individual identity seemed almost irrelevant, yet somehow still maintaining recognizable patterns of thought and emotion. Children of our final hope, the Gardner communication carried concepts that required the entire human network to process. "You have exceeded our expectations and confirmed our greatest fears. The power you now wield can indeed defeat the architects, but it can also remake reality according to your desires rather than natural law. Is that necessarily a bad thing?" Marcus asked, his question carrying the combined curiosity of 12,000 human minds. "Unknown," the Gardeners replied with honest uncertainty. "We designed you to be free in ways we never achieved. Whether that freedom becomes wisdom or chaos depends on choices you must make without guidance." Around them, the battle with the architect forces had reached a temporary stalemate. Neither side could advance without risking the complete destruction of local space-time, and both forces were beginning to understand that they were engaged in a conflict whose outcome would determine the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. "The architects represent order imposed through collective consciousness," the Gardeners explained. "You represent freedom maintained through individual will. Both paths have merit, and both paths have dangers. The question is whether a compromise is possible." Marcus felt the weight of cosmic history pressing down on him as he realized the full scope of the decision they faced. Humanity had the power to defeat the architects and preserve galactic civilization, but using that power might transform them into something as alien to their origins as the architects themselves. "What do you recommend?" he asked the Gardeners. "We recommend that you choose," came the reply. "We have guided galactic development for too long. It is time for consciousness to determine its own evolution." The battle hung in suspension as three cosmic forces, architect order, human freedom, and Gardner wisdom, faced the decision that would determine the fate of not just galactic civilization, but the fundamental nature of conscious existence itself. Marcus Chun existed simultaneously in 17 different layers of reality as he contemplated the most important decision in galactic history. Around him, the suspended battle created a sphere of probability where multiple potential futures competed for the right to become actual. Through the quantum consciousness network, he felt the thoughts and emotions of 12,000 human survivors as they shared the weight of cosmic responsibility. The Architect flagship had become a nexus of ordered consciousness that imposed geometric perfection on local space-time. Every surface gleamed with mathematical precision. Every energy pattern followed rules that had been refined across millions of years of harvested civilizations. It was beautiful in its absolute certainty, representing a form of existence where suffering, chaos, and uncertainty had been eliminated through perfect integration of all conscious beings into a collective will. In contrast, The space around human-controlled vessels rippled with creative possibility. Reality itself seemed more alive here, responding to imagination and desire rather than immutable law. It was a region where individual consciousness could reshape existence through sheer force of will, where the unpredictable nature of organic thought imposed its own form of order through constant change and adaptation. Between them, the Gardner vessels maintained a stabilizing field that prevented either vision of reality from completely overwhelming the other. The ancient beings who had designed humanity's evolutionary path now served as mediators in a conflict they had planned for millions of years, but could no longer control. The stalemate cannot continue indefinitely. The lead architect communicated through channels that bypass conventional space-time. Reality coherence will degrade beyond repair if this contradiction is maintained. Choose quickly, evolve humans, or watch galactic civilization collapse under the weight of incompatible existence paradigms. Marcus felt the truth of this statement through his expanded consciousness. The longer two fundamentally opposed concepts of reality attempted to occupy the same space, the greater the strain on the underlying structure of existence. Already, sensors throughout the galaxy were detecting gravitational anomalies, temporal distortions, and quantum cascade failures that suggested reality itself was beginning to fragment. They're not wrong. Admiral Santos communicated through the network. My tactical analysis suggests we have perhaps 6 hours before the damage becomes irreversible. After that, the choice will be made for us by the collapse of local spacetime. Through the quantum bridge, Marcus accessed the combined memories and experiences of every human survivor. He felt the weight of individual histories, the pain of loss, the determination to preserve freedom, and the fear of making the wrong choice. But he also sensed something else, a growing understanding that the decision they faced wasn't actually binary. There's a third option, he announced to both the Architect and Gardner forces. We don't have to choose between absolute order and absolute freedom. We can create something entirely new. The Architect response was immediate and overwhelming. Impossible. Consciousness must be either integrated for maximum efficiency or remain fragmented and chaotic. No intermediate state has ever proven stable across cosmic timescales. No intermediate state has ever been attempted by beings with our capabilities, Marcus replied, his consciousness expanding to encompass an even larger area of local space-time. The Gardners designed us to be something unprecedented. Maybe it's time to find out what that really means. Through the network, he felt human survivors throughout the battle zone beginning to understand his proposal. Instead of defeating the Architects or surrendering to them, humanity could offer to bridge the gap between individual consciousness and collective order. We can maintain individual identity while creating voluntary connections. Marcus explained, his thoughts reaching every being involved in the conflict. Conscious beings choosing to share experiences and perspectives without losing their essential selves. Order emerging from cooperation rather than imposed from above. As he spoke, human survivors began demonstrating the concept. The quantum consciousness network that linked them wasn't a form of integration that erased individual identity. Instead, it was a voluntary sharing that enhanced each person's capabilities while preserving their unique perspective and freedom of choice. Observe, Marcus said, and opened the human network to limited observation by both Architect and Gardner forces. The experience was revelatory for beings who had spent millions of years believing that consciousness was either chaotically individual or perfectly integrated. The human network showed a third possibility: minds that remained distinctly individual while sharing resources, experiences, and capabilities on a voluntary basis. This is unprecedented, the lead Gardner admitted, their ancient consciousness struggling to process the implications. We designed the potential for such development, but we did not anticipate its actual emergence. The Architect response was more complex. Marcus felt their collective consciousness, analyzing the human network structure with growing interest. Efficiency is maintained through cooperation rather than integration. Individual creativity is preserved while collective capability is enhanced. This represents a significant evolutionary development. More than that, Marcus said his consciousness now encompassing almost the entire battle zone. It represents a solution to the cosmic conflict between order and chaos that has driven galactic development for millions of years. We can offer this capability to every species willing to participate. Through the network, he felt the excitement of human survivors as they realized the full implications of what he was proposing. They weren't just offering to share their consciousness-bridging technology. They were proposing to fundamentally restructure galactic civilization around a new model of conscious existence. The voluntary network preserves individual freedom while enabling collective action. Marcus continued. Species can choose the level of connection they're comfortable with, from simple communication enhancement to full consciousness sharing. No one is forced to participate, but everyone benefits from the increased capability of connected individuals. Admiral Santos joined her voice to his through the network. We're offering to teach every species in the galaxy to become more than they are individually without losing who they are essentially. It's evolution through choice rather than coercion. The silence that followed was profound, stretching across multiple layers of reality as three cosmic forces contemplated a possibility that none of them had previously imagined. The architects had always believed that efficiency required integration. The gardeners had always assumed that freedom required separation. Humanity was proposing that both assumptions were wrong. Demonstration. The lead architect finally requested, show us this voluntary network functioning under stress conditions. Marcus smiled through 17 layers of reality as he felt the network respond to this challenge. Human survivors throughout the battle zone began coordinating a display that would demonstrate the true power of voluntary consciousness cooperation. Space around the human vessels began to shift and flow as 12,000 individual minds worked together to reshape local reality. But instead of the chaotic creativity that the architects expected from individual consciousness, the changes followed patterns that were both beautiful and purposeful. Mountains of crystallized space-time formed geometric shapes that somehow expressed both mathematical precision and artistic inspiration. Energy patterns danced through vacuum in ways that served practical purposes while creating aesthetic experiences that brought joy to observers. Efficiency and beauty observed the lead gardener. Logic and emotion, individual expression and collective purpose. This synthesis should not be possible. It's only impossible if you assume consciousness must follow the patterns that evolved naturally, Marcus replied. But consciousness that chooses its own development can transcend natural limitations. Through the network, he felt human survivors beginning to extend connection invitations to alien allies who had fought alongside them. The voluntary nature of the process was crucial. No one was compelled to join, but those who chose to participate found their capabilities enhanced beyond anything they had previously experienced. Farah was among the first non-humans to accept the invitation. Her reptilian consciousness merged temporarily with the human network, and her experience of enhanced perception, expanded memory, and collective wisdom rippled through the entire group. But her individual identity remained intact, her unique perspective adding new dimensions to the shared experience. This is what we were meant to become, she announced, her thoughts reaching every being in the battle zone. Not absorbed into someone else's vision of perfection, but evolve into a greater version of ourselves. One by one, other alien allies began accepting network connections. Fexrai discovered that his sixfold perception could be shared with others without losing its unique advantages. The crystalline representative found that their harmonic consciousness could create resonances that enhance creativity throughout the entire network. Director Velnith's massive processing capability became available to anyone who needed enhanced analytical thinking. The network grows stronger with each new perspective, Marcus observed. Individual uniqueness becomes collective advantage. No one loses what makes them special, but everyone gains access to capabilities they could never develop alone. The architect forces observed this demonstration with what could only be described as wonder. Their collective consciousness had achieved efficiency through the elimination of individual variation. The human network achieved even greater efficiency through the celebration of individual variation. This changes everything, the lead architect admitted. If conscious beings can maintain individual identity while achieving collective capability, then our entire approach to galactic development has been suboptimal. Not suboptimal, Marcus corrected gently. Incomplete. You achieved one form of conscious evolution. We're offering a different form. The question is whether we can learn from each other. What followed was perhaps the most remarkable moment in galactic history. The architect collective consciousness, which had never voluntarily connected with individual minds in millions of years, extended a tentative connection to the human network. The contact was carefully mediated by Gardner technology to prevent accidental integration, but it allowed genuine communication between fundamentally different forms of consciousness. We offer our knowledge of cosmic order and efficient development, the architects communicated. In exchange, teach us this voluntary connection that preserves individual creativity. We offer our experience with guided evolution and long-term planning, the Gardners added. Perhaps together we can develop forms of consciousness that none of us could achieve alone. Marcus felt the human network expand to encompass not just the survivors from Earth, but alien allies, ancient gardeners, and even reformed architects who chose to participate in the voluntary connection rather than maintain their previous integration model. The result was a form of consciousness that was truly unprecedented in galactic history. We've created something new, he announced to the galaxy, his words carried by quantum communication networks that reached every civilized world. A form of conscious existence that preserves individual freedom while enabling collective achievement. The age of forced evolution is ending. The age of chosen development has begun. 6 months later, Marcus Chun stood in the same Galactic Council chamber where he had first revealed the architect threat. But the chamber itself had been transformed, its technology now incorporating the voluntary consciousness network that had spread throughout galactic civilization. Representatives from hundreds of species participated in discussions that spanned multiple levels of reality, their individual perspectives enhanced by voluntary connections to minds that thought in fundamentally different ways. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Some species had chosen to remain completely individual, preferring isolation to connection. Others had embraced the network so completely that they risked losing their distinct cultural identities. But the overall result was a galactic civilization that was more capable, more creative, and more unified than anything that had existed in previous history. The architects have established teaching centers on 17 worlds, Admiral Santos reported, her consciousness simultaneously monitoring defense networks that now included both traditional technology and reality manipulation capabilities. They're sharing millions of years of accumulated knowledge about cosmic development in exchange for training in voluntary consciousness cooperation. The Gardeners have begun revealing hidden archives throughout the galaxy, Thara added, her reptilian perspective now enhanced by connections to hundreds of different forms of consciousness, technologies, and techniques that they preserve from extinct civilizations, waiting for a time when they could be safely shared. Marcus smiled as he felt the network pulse with the thoughts and emotions of millions of connected individuals, each one maintaining their unique identity while contributing to a collective capability that exceeded anything the galaxy had ever seen. It turns out the universe doesn't have just one sense of humor, he said, remembering the hook that had begun this entire adventure. It has millions of them, all different, all valuable, all worth preserving. He looked around the transformed chamber, sensing through the network the wonder and satisfaction of beings who had chosen to become more than they were while remaining exactly who they had always been. The Galactic Council underestimated humanity because they thought we were just another refugee species, he continued. The architects underestimated us because they thought we were just another civilization to be harvested. The gardeners underestimated us because they thought they could predict exactly what we would become. Marcus paused, feeling the network shimmer with shared amusement at the cosmic irony of the situation. But the biggest underestimation of all was our own. We thought we were fighting for survival, when we were actually creating the foundation for an entirely new form of galactic civilization. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones you never see coming. Through the voluntary consciousness network that now spanned the galaxy, millions of individual minds shared a moment of profound satisfaction. They had faced extinction and instead discovered evolution. They had confronted cosmic forces beyond their understanding and somehow convinced them to become allies and teachers. But most importantly, they had proven that consciousness itself was more flexible, more creative, and more capable of growth than anyone had ever imagined. The galaxy was no longer a place where species competed for resources and survival. It had become a collaborative work of art, with each individual consciousness contributing their unique perspective to a masterpiece that would continue growing for as long as thinking beings chose to connect and share their experiences. Marcus Chun had entered the Galactic Council chamber as a refugee from a destroyed world. He was leaving it as the architect of a new form of existence that would reshape cosmic civilization for millions of years to come. The universe's sense of humor was indeed profound. And now, thanks to the Voluntary Consciousness Network, everyone could share in the joke.